What happens when you realize the stories you've been writing since childhood weren't just stories? They were your first attempts at making sense of your world. Welcome to I Have Questions with Michael Ruland. That's where we're going to begin in part 2 of my conversation with Kestrel Gayan. In this episode, we explore the moment Kestrel understood that storytelling wasn't just expression, it was connection. Kestrel walks us through how their creative life took shape. This part of the conversation is all about curiosity, observation, and the quiet power of paying attention. Do you have any questions? I hope so, because
I have questions.
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 I'm paying the food that doesn't have questions, which I do.
so I guess, you were able to take that lack of mirrors and that lack of representation, I believe, and you have turned it into such positivity. And I believe, by looking through your books and your poetry, it's clear to me that you believe storytelling saves lives and changes the world, right? Uh, when how old were you, or where were you when you realized that you had the power of telling stories that could make a mirror for others?
I think there's a difference between when I kind of started it naturally and when I then became aware of the potential power of what I was doing. I've always been someone that liked to write stuff, even from the age of sort of 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
I used to take paper and sit under the dining room table, and I would proclaim to everyone that I was writing my autobiography. I'm not sure where at 5 years old I got that word from. And so every day I would do 1 or 2 sheets of paper, and just with a crayon or whatever, I would write about my day. And it was often
That's
just
awesome.
pictures and a couple of words, and really simplistic.
Yep.
I was only 5, but
You're
I called it my
journaling at 5.
autobiography. Yeah, it was probably more a diary than an autobiography, in fairness. But it was just a way of expressing myself and how I saw the world. And I think it was as I got older and realized that was a really conscious thing I was doing. I wasn't just putting things on paper. I was saying, this is how I see the world around me. And that's kind of how it started. For me, putting words on a page was a way of me being able to express to other people how I saw the world around me. And as I got older, that then evolved into a really powerful kind of idea of being able to say, this is how some people see the world. This is how I see the world. This is how others see the world. And this is how those people that see the world differently are able to find common ground and relate to each other and see things in different ways. And that's a really important part of most of the storytelling I do is different people coming together and finding common ground when they have almost nothing sometimes in common. And I often say that when I write poetry, it's very different to when I write fiction. Poetry is how I try to make sense of the world. So poems for me are all about exploring the world around me and trying to make sense of this kind of weird and wonderful place that we find ourselves living in. And then writing stories, whether that's for a fiction book or whether that's for the stage or anything like that, that tends to be more how I see the world, how I see connection between people, and thinking about how different types of people come together and live either in harmony or otherwise, but how they meet. It's all about the kind of meeting of difference.
Cool. Yeah. So you've mentioned that you're traveling and you're kind of view the world from some different lenses. When you're traveling, do you and that you love to write and have loved your whole life in essence, when you're traveling, are you a kind of a person who carries a notebook that's open with them all the time, and pay attention to the things that are around you, and I guess I don't even know if that's a question. Um,
No, it's
uh,
a good question.
do
And
you do that? I guess is that how you do things, or do you just how do you approach it with a
yeah,
notebook while you're
I
traveling?
I very rarely go anywhere, even if it's just to the shop, without having a notebook in a bag somewhere. And I mean, different modes of writing for different things. Almost everything for me starts off as a note scribbled in a notebook. If I'm writing then a bigger story or fiction, I tend to very quickly move to a computer because that's just the way to be able to process lots of words at a time in this day and
Yeah,
age. Um, but often then I'm sat somewhere public doing that because I like to be inspired by things going on around me. But I always have a paper notebook with me and a pen. Sometimes it's a very tiny one, sometimes it's more of an A5 one. But all of my poems have started out in a notebook, and most of my stories have started out even with character development and things done in those notebooks. And that has paid dividends because there are so many things that I've witnessed or experienced or seen, and I've had immediate things to process. And I've done that by writing about it either poetically or otherwise in my notebook, or a sudden moment of inspiration strikes and I get to write it down right away.
hmm
My entire last poetry book, so the before my most recent fiction novel, I released a poetry book called Tube Lines, and
hmm
all of the poems were written whilst on a train on the London Underground or in a station or on a platform. And I couldn't have done that if I didn't carry a notebook with me everywhere I went, because quite often I
yeah,
was just sat on a train and I was that weirdo who just like something happened around me and I'd get out a notebook and I'd be quickly writing down while the train was
yep.
moving. I look back at my notes and I can't read half of them because the train stops and my pen goes off the page. Um, but it's brilliant. It's just such a wonderful way to be able to observe and explore the world around me.
Yeah. I did ask that question based off of what I knew, which is not much of tube lines. So and I think that uh, I don't know, to me that makes perfect sense. It's even when you look at your notes and you see the train stop and your pen shooting off the page, that's part of the story, right? That's a purpose. And so I think uh, uh, I'm asking these questions more out of my own curiosity because I am not a writer. I'm in the world of writing. I'm not. I don't carry pen and paper, and I oftentimes wished I would. But I, there's a disconnect for me, so I'm always kind of curious about that, right? So the I guess the word curiosity is something that drew me to you as well because you use the word curiosity a lot. Um, and I something I've read is you said curiosity is found in the tiniest, almost in the tiniest details, um, on how people are waiting and what they carry and how a place feels, right? And that's part
Mm.
of being out there with your notebook and noticing people. How did you have to train yourself to to be curious about those little tiny details, um, that most of us will overlook? So, did you have to train yourself, or was that just part of who Kestrel is?
I think it's a bit of nature and a bit of nurture, but I don't think the goal was curiosity. I think that came as a side effect of
Mm,
the world I found myself in. Um, being unable to kind of growing up, being unable to really be who you are, or not really knowing who you are and not having the language for that, you often take a step back. You don't kind of put yourself right in the middle of things. You don't
yeah.
join in the big group activities. You don't go and be a part of this or a part of that. I would often just kind of stand back, stand on the sidelines and watch. And that's something I think you have to have a balance between participating and not participating. And I had to spend a lot of time training myself to actually want to be in social situations and do more things. And, I found my people and found people to do that with. And that's been great. I love being social. But I think growing up with that default um, not, of kind of being almost a passive observer to the world around me meant that I was able and really easily able to be in a crowded space, but be part of the furniture and to kind of blend into the background. And I would do that because I wasn't comfortable in a space or because I didn't have the energy to be social in any given day. And then I started noticing when you do that, you see so much. If you're active in a space, but not actively a part of that space, there's this kind of magic energy where you are hyper aware of everything that's around you because you are not having to suspend any of your energy performing and being a part of what's going on around you. So you notice things. You notice that if someone's having an awkward conversation, they're shifting their weight from one foot to another. And you notice that someone's playing with the finger that maybe there used to be a ring on and there isn't anymore. And you notice that someone's maybe touching their jaw in a certain way, or someone's thinking and then they think about something different and their eyes shift from one side to the other, even though they're not aware that they're doing it. Yeah. And it is those tiny, I often call them imperceptible moments because, 99% of the time they're completely unnoticed by anyone. But sometimes there's someone in a space that's just observing and they might see that. And that, I think there's something really quite fantastic about realizing that we can be noticed at any point in time. And that I think for me is very poetic because you're looking at who a person is beyond the person they're performing to be.
Yes, right. Because we all are on stage
all the
in
time.
essence,
Absolutely. That's what we do. And it's those moments where things leak through the cracks that are the most telling and the most interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you're describing that, the whole time I'm just thinking, well, that's what makes authors is they notice those things because then that can be put into the storytelling and make it so believable and so personal. So yeah, that I know that I don't feel like, as you're explaining that, I don't notice that stuff at all. I'm more of I guess I'm more of on the stage. People would probably describe me as at least the old me before I got sick, they would describe me as the lead actor who's always animated and not noticing things around him. So I'm trying to slow down and notice better. So
I certainly have days where I'm that person as well.
Yeah. You know what? And maybe that's the key, right? A good mix of everything, right? So, all right. I want to take a little jog in the path here from writing. Well, it's still about writing, I guess, but as I mentioned at the end of the introduction, it's Pride Month. And I think with your voice, are there some LGBTQ plus authors that, other than yourself, that people should be reading now that have grasped your attention?
There are some fantastic LGBTQ plus authors out there who are telling really fantastic, compelling stories that contain LGBTQ plus characters and themes where that's not the main topic of the story. I think there is really a place for, and I think there are some wonderful stories out there where that journey of discovering who you are is really important.
Yeah.
I also love having stories where there are just LGBTQ plus people going about their lives, doing things, saving
Right.
the world, not because they're gay, but just because of what they're doing. And
Like they should be like the rest. They're just part of society.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Stephen Dalton, an Irish author, and Kay Tempest, an English author, have done some fantastic work around that recently in terms of novels. They've both got new novels out at the moment that are exceptional in terms of their storytelling. One's a bit more horror, one's a bit more comedy. And I think there are fantastic TV writers out there at the moment. I love a bit of television. I'm not one of these authors that says nobody should watch TV. I think, different means for different stories. And looking at some of the stories that people like Russell T Davies, who's an English TV writer, creates that are you know fantasy or sci-fi or kind of gritty cultural things that just happen to have LGBTQ plus people in them, talking about themselves, talking about their lives, being themselves, having partners, and it's all that kind of thing. I think is really healthy and really great, and
Mhm.
that always fills me with a lot of joy to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you that it's uh, once we can get to a point where we're done having to treat it as something separate and different is when I think we're finally making the steps in the right direction as a society. So very cool.
Agreed.
So how how h- how has queerness shaped your storytelling though? Not the content like we just talked about, right? But has it shaped your form and structure and the way you kind of imagine the possibility of a story? Um, ha-
I think
has it?
it's changed it in different ways over the course of my life so far. I think we all come to learn more about ourselves and the world around us the more we explore it and the more we grow. And I'm a huge fan of learning as this lifelong thing, as I said earlier. And I think that
Yeah,
applies both to formal education and what we learn about ourselves and other communities. I think, when I was younger, I was very keen to kind of write stories where there were people that were like me in it. And because I hadn't had stories where there were people like me, and I wanted to make sure those were there. And particularly like how the kind of person I confidently, as we're kind of sort of 18, 19, and we're like, right, I'm an adult now. I know everything. I know everything about myself. I know everything about the world, and I'm sorted. And of course, now I look back and I think, oh, you poor child, you knew nothing. Um, but I think my writing of characters, my writing of worlds has evolved so much since then, because I think I've come to realize that my own queerness, my own kind of relationship with my LGBTQ plus identity is mine and is one experience of that. And the kind of intersectionality of creating characters who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, but in different ways, who are different to me, who have come to their identities in different ways or at different times, or who have gone through different kind of hardships than I have, or have ended up in a different place, or have changed their identities different times during their life. I think that is something that those are stories that I couldn't have told 20 years ago, but that I can
mm,
now. And I feel really good about that.
yeah,
And I feel like that's a really nice thing to be able to do now. And I think I appreciate so much more the kind of depth of character or depth of community I can create within stories for having had that experience of connecting with different
yeah,
people and understanding their hardships and their relationships.
yeah. Cool. Um, I just have a couple more questions, but before I do, I have to ask. You probably don't even know this is going on behind you, but what is your cat's name?
So I can see him in my video preview just over my shoulder there. His name is Compton, and he's actually named
Compton.
after the Compton's cafeteria in San Francisco,
Ooh.
where in 1967 there was a protest by transgender women there who had been frequenting the cafe. The cafe owner had decided that he didn't want LGBT people there. They decided to stand their ground. It was kind of a Stonewall before Stonewall. It was a real watershed moment for trans rights. He's named after the Compton Cafe, and he is a character. He has the personality of a dog and a human. He's the least cat-like cat I've ever had in my life. He growls at the postman. He takes up all of the space. He eats my food. I had a cookie with my tea earlier, and I looked away and I came back and he'd eaten half the cookie. I mean, he's the most human cat I've ever had. And he does often get a bit jealous if I'm talking to someone and he's not involved. So he's just popped himself there. He knows that he's in the shot of the video right now. But yeah.
Everything you just said makes perfect sense, because as I've been listening to you, I've been focused on Compton, and he just looks like he knows what he's doing. That's awesome. All right. Sorry, I diverged, but I think that was awesome in the background for the name. Spectacular. So thanks for humoring me on that. And that's going to bring us to the end of part 2 of my conversation with Kestrel Guyan. You know, today we dug into the roots of their storytelling, from childhood notebooks to poetry written on trains, from observing the world as an outsider to finding meaning in the smallest human gestures. It's a reminder that creativity often begins long before we realize what it is we're doing. You know, next week in part 3, we take the conversation to some new territory. We're going to talk about LGBTQ plus representation in literature, the authors Kestrel believes everyone should be reading, how queerness shapes not just content, but structure and imagination, and yes, the cat you've been seeing in the background. We also dive into Kestrel's concerns about AI in creative spaces and why curiosity might be the most powerful antidote we have to technology. You know, if you're enjoying this series, please subscribe, like, and share the podcast. It helps more people find these conversations, and it helps our community of curious and questioning humans grow. So, stay curious, keep asking questions, and I'll see you next week. P.S. Never leave without a P.S. So before we close today, I just a couple weeks ago read a book. It was a good short book, so it was good for me, about coal mining in Wales and Great Britain in the mid 1700s. And number 1, yuck. Number 2, wow, humans treat other humans poorly. I won't lie. But part of that story, it's called Freedom. Part of that story had to do with the Thames River in England. And so I want to take you to that river that has watched an entire nation grow around it. This river carried kings and merchants and poets and everyday travelers and coal and supplies for thousands of years. The River Thames. So the River Thames is 215 miles long, winding from the quiet hills of Gloucestershire all the way to the North Sea. It's the longest river entirely in England and one of the only major rivers in the world that at tide reaches deep into the heart of a capital city. Twice a day, the Thames rises and falls, breathes in and out, and it's become a rhythm London has lived with for centuries. You know, most people think of it as a landmark and a backdrop for postcards and bridges, lots and lots of bridges. But if you travel along it, you know, really travel along it, something shifts. The Thames becomes a timeline. It's a moving archive. It's a place where history and the present sit side by side on the same current. You know, Roman soldiers once sailed this water. So did Viking raiders. So did barges that fed London during the Black Plague. and the boats that carried evacuee children to safety during World War II. And today, commuters glide across it on sleek ferries while rowers cut through the morning mist for enjoyment and exercise. But here's the part that should spark curiosity. The Thames rewards the observer. You walk beside it and you start to notice things. The way the tide pulls at those embankments, the way the city sounds different from the water, the way every bend reveals a new version of London and England. Travel it slowly enough and you begin to understand why so many writers and explorers and dreamers found clarity along its banks. Because the Thames teaches us a quiet truth. Movement doesn't always mean rushing. Sometimes it just means drifting and watching and letting the world come to us. So, as you step away from this episode today, carry this with you. Where in your life could you trade speed for attention? And what might you finally see if you let yourself travel at the pace of a river? Because the Thames reminds us the journey isn't about where you're going, it's about what you're going to notice along the way. Peace, love, R.